I'm Ann Bocock, and welcome to Between the Covers. Linwood Barclay is the internationally best-selling author of 15 books. His background was the newspaper business, mainly with Canada's largest paper, the Toronto Star. For years, he was the paper's popular humor columnist, and he did his writing of fiction at night. Well, all that changed when he hit the international bestseller list with his thriller, No Time for Goodbye. And then he left the paper to write fiction full-time. He has been writing for years now. His books have been translated into 30 languages. The new book, Broken Promise, is just the way I like it, full of family secrets and surprises, and it is my pleasure to welcome to Between the Covers, Linwood Barclay.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right, coolest chapter one ever in a book.
Yeah, it's kind of short.
It's kind of short because it's 4 words.
Yeah, I hate this town.
I hate this town.
And it's in italics. That's a clue, sort of.
So I opened the book, I read chapter 1, and I went, oh, that's good. You got me right there.
Well, and it feels like you're really progressing quickly into the novel because you're already to chapter 2, just like that.
Exactly, before you know it. And before we really get into the book while we're talking about this, the trailers for your book, and I'm talking video trailers. So I'm going to tell our audience, immediately after this, go onto your website, look you up. There are Hollywood-worthy trailers for the books.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, our son makes those. Our son Spencer, he makes those. He went to the Ontario College of Art and Design in Toronto, and he did a lot of film work. And around 2009, I had noticed more authors were doing video on their websites, sort of, sitting at the computer and saying, "Hi, I'm writing a new book about," and I said, "Can you do some videos like that for me?" And he said, "Well, I'll do the videos, but they're not going to be like that." And so they're like sort of little mini movies. They give you a sense of what the book is about, and we hire actors and we do this whole thing, and they look like a trailer for a movie.
They look exactly like a trailer.
A lot of people get confused. They see it's a book trailer, but people see them and they say, "Wow, I didn't know it was coming out as a movie. When's it coming out?" Sorry.
And when is it coming out as a movie?
Well, lots of the books, several of my books have been optioned for film, and of course, as you probably know, Hollywood probably, for every movie that gets made from a book, Hollywood's probably optioned 100 books. So I've had quite a few optioned. We had a big option for a while on Trust Your Eyes, and then it lapsed, and now someone else has it. And 2 of my other books have just been optioned for TV in France. And so I've come to conclude that having a book optioned is like reserving a book at the library that you never pick up.
Okay.
So when somebody says, "Well, when I get the call that says we're going to option such and such," I think, fine, that's great. But we'll see.
There is no way to put Broken Promise down. And I am a sucker for a book that has dark family secrets. And this one is a doozy because they just keep coming. We're going to get to some of these juicy parts soon. But I want to talk about the town. We've been to this town before.
Yes. I've written about Promise Falls in some other novels. Promise Falls was the setting for Too Close to Home. It was the setting for Never Look Away. And it was also, to some degree, the setting for Trust Your Eyes, although the setting in that novel was less important, I think. So we've been here before, and I decided to bring back some characters that I had written about in the past, some from a book as long ago as 2009. And I thought, well, they live there. Let's just bring them back. It's not even like you have to have read the other novels. It's just that these are people that do exist in other books.
Your characters are really lifelike, which is a huge compliment. They have their flaws. They are very human. And I guess we can identify with this. For me, what makes the books compelling is that the scary stuff is stuff that could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
The situations.
Well, I like to get people where they live. I want to get readers where they live. And as I've often said, I love a great Jack Reacher novel or Jason Bourne or James Bond, any of those. But I don't typically identify with them. It's been years since I smuggled plutonium, and so And when Jack Reacher's in a bar somewhere and he's antagonized a bunch of guys ready to swing pool cues at them, I'm not worried for him. I'm worried for all the other guys. And so I write a book about ordinary people, and because people I know don't wake at night worried about nuclear attack or anything like that. They worry about, well, why is it 3 o'clock in the morning and my daughter's not home?
Exactly.
That's what keeps people awake at night. And so I sort of tap into the things the anxieties that we all have.
When you were a columnist, you were very popular and you wrote a humorous column. So is this the flip side now? You get to write about the dark parts?
Yeah, although there's still humor in the books, I think. The first
and
four...
there is humor, which is interesting.
The first 4 novels I wrote, which were the ones that had... I did 4 books that weren't that successful, and then I did No Time for Goodbye. They were sort of comic thrillers. And yet it's not hard for me to switch to this. I mean, I gotta say, there's still a bit of humor in them, but the column that I did was, I always called it an alleged humor column, because if you write a sports column, even if it's a bad sports column, everybody knows what it is. But if you write a humor column and nobody gets it, then I'm not sure what it is. Okay. But I don't know what it was. It wasn't hard to shift gears. And the thing is, I'd been wanting to write crime fiction and have been writing crime fiction since my teens, and it just took a while to get published.
Your first mystery character, or the first one in the series, was Zach Walker.
That's right.
And you called him, and I wrote this down because I want to get it correct. You have called him an anxiety-ridden, know-it-all, pain-in-the-butt father.
Yeah.
Great description.
Well-intentioned, though.
True.
Well-intentioned.
And I think readers love him because he is this anxiety-ridden, pain-in-the-butt father. We know what that character is.
Yeah, I hate to tell you who he's based on.
Should I ask your kids?
Oh, they know.
Okay.
They know, for sure.
The new book revolves around David Harwood.
Yeah.
And we've seen him before. And as a reader, you feel for this guy right away. He is carrying a lot of baggage. Do you want to go back a little bit and explain?
Well, and without giving away the details, but by the end of the book, Never Look Away, he's no longer has a spouse. And so we move ahead a few years, and he's raising his son Ethan on his own. He had left Promise Falls for a while to get a job as an editor at the Boston Globe, but that didn't work out very well. And he was never home for his son because he was working evenings. And he thought, maybe I should go back to Promise Falls where my parents are, who can help me with Ethan. And so he gets a job at his old paper, and on day 1 of his coming back, the paper goes out of business. So he's out of work, and he's living with his parents and raising a son on his own. And as his mom's always trying to set him up with somebody, like, hey, I saw this lovely checkout girl at Walgreens you would just love. And his dad will say, oh, for God's sakes, Arlene, he's out of work, he's a single father, and he's living with his parents. What's he got to offer? And David will say, yeah, thanks for being there, Dad. That's great.
He is out of work. His wife is gone. He's doing what no adult man wants to do, and that's move back in with your parents.
And he's 40. It's not good. It's really not good.
And it goes downhill from there.
Oh yeah, just when you think it couldn't get worse, it gets worse.
He lost his newspaper job. And let's talk about that for a moment, because you worked for decades in the newspaper business. We have seen this happen across the board in this country. So many fine reporters and columnists lost their jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel very bad. I feel really torn about and upset about what's happened with newspapers, and I don't see a real answer. If you were to, the papers just keep getting smaller and smaller. I call it circling the drain. That newspapers see that they're losing money, they have less ad revenue, so they cut reporters, they cut staff, which means they offer fewer news stories and fewer features. Readers notice, so they cancel the paper. More advertisers pull out, so they lay off more reporters, and this spiral only ends in one place. And I feel bad because I think we really need strong local news coverage. We need people who are newspapers that are willing to invest in the community. and do the stories that need to be done, and that's not happening, and it's too bad. But it's the whole world is changing. Whether it's how you get your music or your books or your newspapers, everything's changing.
Speaking of how you get your books, would you prefer us to purchase this book in this hard copy form, or?
Well, I don't care. You can as long as you get it. Okay. I saw there was a lady last night at the book signing I did up in north of here, near Jacksonville, and she said, "I just bought your book." She says, "But I haven't read it yet." I said, "Well, you've done the important part." So, I mean, you don't have to read it now. I mean, you've bought it. That's enough for me.
I love it. I'm going back to Promise Falls now because there are so many peculiar things going on. Mm-hmm. Number one, David has moved back to town. He goes to see his cousin Marla. Now, I am not going to give away stuff. You're still going to read the book and like it, because I hate when somebody tells me this. But let's say this. Marla, months before David got back, suffered a devastating miscarriage. Now, when David shows up at her home, she's taking care of a baby. Mm-hmm. And how did she say that baby got there?
She said, David shows up, and this is about 10 months after she lost a child, and she's looking after a little infant boy. And he says, and Marla says, "This is my baby." And he says, "Well, where did this baby come from?" And she said, "An angel came to the door and gave him to me." And that seems rather unlikely. And so David continues to push to find out. And Marla hasn't been well. She's, since losing a child, she's been very emotionally damaged, and so he's trying to find out what really happened. And finally, he where did this baby come from? What do you mean, an angel? And so forth. And finally, phones his mom from Marla's place and says, "Mom, I don't know, I hate to say this, but I get the feeling that Marla's taken a kid from somebody." And his mom says, "Oh no, not again."
Yeah. And at that point, you're not putting this book down. Now, granted, that's not the only thing going on in this interesting town.
No, not by a long shot.
We have something going on at the local college. We have, there is a murder. I kind of glossed over the fact that there is a murder. And there is also something very peculiar going on at an abandoned amusement park, to name just a few things. One of your characters, and I'm not going to say which one, has it's a cognitive impairment. And it is, I know I'm going to butcher this word, I think it's prosopagnosia?
That's close. Okay. I think. It's face blindness.
Face blindness. Yeah. Tell me about face blindness, and where did that come from?
Well, I'd never heard of it before until I was watching 60 Minutes one night. And this is a rather rare condition that some people have. In fact, I realized I have a friend who has it. She's since told me. And it's a real difficulty in recognizing other people's faces, even those that you see or know every day. And they highlighted it in a very interesting way on the show. They took faces of well-known people and they turned them upside down for those of us who do not have face blindness and said, "Who is that person?" And you looked at it and it was just like, "I don't get it. I don't know who it is." And then they uprighted it and it was like, "Oh, it's Meryl Streep or something." And they said that's how people with face blindness see all of us. They don't connect the dots. They don't see what it is. So they look for clues, like, do you always wear a certain hat, or do you always wear a plaid shirt, or so they kind of have these helpful reminders. And when I heard about that, I thought, I got to use that someday.
Absolutely.
And somebody told me that another author has used it fairly recently too, in a bigger way. It doesn't play a huge role in the book, but it plays a part.
It was fascinating. We know, as we said before, David has to move back in with his parents, and we know how that is not an easy thing to do. You treat that in an interesting way. There is some humor. You also treat it very carefully. And not only is it humorous, but it hits home for a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's humiliating for David.
That's the word.
But there's a lot of humor in humiliation. And without trying to humiliate David himself in the story, it's kind of funny. And having to be at that age and living with his parents and you know, when you figure once you get to be 40, when you're heading out somewhere and someone says, oh, where are you going? Like, you shouldn't have to tell them. You know, it's just like, you should just come and go as you please. But it's, oh, you're going to be here for dinner, or are you coming back? And it's all these little things. And he knows he just has to get out. And in fact, as the story progresses, there becomes an opportunity where he may have employment again. And although it's not necessarily a job he wants.
And that's an interesting twist as well. It also brings me to David's father, who has a hobby that you share.
Oh yeah,
he has a hobby that my husband shares, and this is model trains.
Yeah, he used his, as a lot of parents or a lot of fathers might do, when you have a child, especially if you have a son or even a daughter or whatever, it's great to use a kid as a cover story to start buying the toys you've always wanted. You know, so you think your child has not even yet learned how to drool, and you think, wow, he needs a Lionel train set.
Yes, he does.
That's what I don't care about, but that's what he needs. So it's a bit like that.
So you have an enormous layout at your house.
Well, it fills a room about 15 feet square. It goes
That's
right
pretty
over.
good.
Yeah.
As long as it's not in the living room, we're in good shape.
I raised that as a possibility, and it shot down fairly quickly.
So if you're stuck with a plot line, you go down to the basement and run the trains?
I find it's very zen-like, actually, just to stand in the room and just and the sound of the trains and have them going around. I find it very kind of calming, very zen-like, and it's nice to work on it. As I've said before, you spend all day inventing a world in your head. And you can go downstairs and then make one with your hands and do the sort of physical work.
It's your Yoda meditation room.
I think it is. It is. It's just very relaxing. And I mean, I think my dad built a train set for me when I was 4 or 5. And anytime we ever had a house or a basement, I usually had one.
Can we talk about your dad for a moment? I know he died when you were very young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my father was a commercial artist, and if you were to look in the pages of Life, Look, or Saturday Evening Magazine, Saturday Evening Post, in the 50s, early 60s, you would have noticed, of course, that all the car ads at that time were illustrations and not photography. And so it's very likely that he drew those. He was the guy who drew those cars. And but as the 60s progressed, photography killed that. And as my dad said, they started making the cars look so much better, we didn't have to cheat with the drawings. And so my parents bought they totally switched gears and bought a cottage resort trailer park in the Kawartha Lakes region of Ontario in Canada.
That's when you moved from?
No, we had moved. My father was hired by an advertising studio in Toronto. And so we moved to Canada as I was about turning 4. But about 6-7 years after he'd come to Canada, what he did, nobody really needed anymore. So they bought this cottage resort and trailer park, and at the age of, when I was 16, my father died. He was 59. He had lung cancer, and he died. So I essentially took over looking after my mom and an older schizophrenic brother, and running the camp, running this resort basically at the age of 16.
That's a lot for a teenager.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
So, kinda. So all this was, and my mother was very happy to just put it all onto me. I mean, she managed and ran the business, but all of the essential, like the basic grunt work of doing it was my job. And so I did that for several years until I left home at 22.
Your books are based in the United States. Why not in Canada?
Well, the very nasty people that are in my books, I mean, if I made them Canadian, you wouldn't believe it.
Do you know, I actually believe you. I think that's true.
We're just too nice, you know. I mean, if we would kill you, but then we would apologize endlessly.
So no Canadian locations in future Barclay books?
Maybe someday, possibly. Although it's not specifically said, the Zach books I think take place in Canada. Okay. Yeah, I kind of like upstate New York, and about half of my books are set in an actual real place called Milford, Connecticut.
I've been to Milford, Connecticut.
Yeah, and I used my 2 aunts, my father's 2 sisters lived in Milford, and I went to see them every year until the last of them passed away in '96. So I know it really well, and I thought, that's a good location for books.
Your books have also been translated into 30 languages at least. Is it a kick to see your book in many languages?
Yeah, well, it is. And of course, because you're sort of your publishers around the world are contractually obliged to send you a couple of copies of each book. So FedEx comes to the door and then they'll open it up and I think, I don't even know what this is. And sometimes you can't even make out your byline. Like the name isn't even the same. Like the Hebrew or the Russian editions, I don't know what this is. And the Japanese ones, and some of those. And you have to go to the copyright page where there's this little line of English that tells you which book it is, for example. But it's very cool. And my brother, his whole life is fascinated with languages, whenever I either get a Russian or a German or a French edition, he wants those. He reads them that way.
He reads them in those languages?
Yeah,
okay.
He'll read in English too, but he likes to read them. He'll read them over and over in all the different languages.
Your books have garnered praise from all around the world, and Stephen King is a huge fan. How does that make you feel?
That was pretty cool. We sort of found out by accident he'd written something in Entertainment Weekly one time about how he'd read Never Look Away and thought it was the best thriller he'd read in 5 years. And then when Trust Your Eyes was coming up, we had sent him an advance copy and he gave us this astonishing quote for it. So he was a fan, and so what's hilarious is Stephen King is on Twitter. He follows only 22 people, and I'm one of them. And I think he just sort of signed on and followed a few people and then thought, I don't care about anybody else. And then just every once in a while he does a funny tweet. But the funniest thing was, like I say, he had done all this wonderful blurb for us for Trust Your Eyes, which features a website based on Google Street View called World 360. We made it up. I made it up. It doesn't exist. There is no World 360 as a application to travel around the world and view things like Google Street View. So I was reading Dr. Sleep, which is Stephen King's sequel to The Shining. Mm-hmm. And at one point, the bad guys in it are trying to find somebody, so they use World 360. And I thought, no, you're kidding me. And then I had met him later that year, and he said, did you catch the reference? I said, oh, yeah. I did.
Authors do this
I know,
every now and then, don't they?
Yeah, there's a little nod to each other.
I like that.
Yeah, it's nice. I think it's kind of fun.
The new book, this book, Broken Promise, is the first of a trilogy. Mm-hmm. I found out as I read the last page of the book that there is more to come. Now, is this something you knew at the start that, wow, this is going to take me 3 books to finish this, to get this story done?
Well, I had set out from the very beginning, I thought it would be interesting to do 3 connected novels and have a backstory that runs through all 3 of them. And so there's the backstory that runs through books 1 and 2 that explodes in book 3. The whole book 3 is really what is the whole backstory. So for example, the Marla story and this child that we talked about is sort of is the primary story in book 1. And there's another primary story in book 2. But throughout book 1 and 2 is this building backstory, this other plot line that's going along. And as I say, and the great thing is they're all written. So I had feared that I would get to, if I wrote these 3 books on the usual schedule of 1 a year, I would get to the 3rd book, think of something great to put in it, that I should have set up in book 1, and it's too late. I'd have to go into Murder on the Beach, take the books all off the shelf and scratch out stuff and make changes. And that's very inconvenient. So I wrote them one after the other. So I wrote all 3 of them in 15 months. And
you did nothing but write.
Well, I also slept.
But not much. Okay.
Ran some trains. No, it was just that I just thought I had to get all of them done in case there was something I needed to set up in book 1, and I would still have time to do it before it went to press.
When you have the same character that is following in books, when you revisit, do you take into account he's aged, things may have happened to him between book 1 and book 3? Does he change at all?
Well, a number of the characters have, Randall Findlay, who was the town's mayor in Too Close to Home. A lot of things have happened to him in the interim. He started up a different business and so forth, and now he wants to be mayor again. And so it's basically been told in real time. Ethan, his son, has grown, the number of years it has been since the novel Never Look Away. So, and David, of course, had gone to Boston. He's come back. So yeah, they've moved ahead in real time in this one. That
town would make a great soap opera.
Wouldn't it?
Town.
It's like it would put Peyton Place to shame.
It would. It would.
Like, they got nothing going on compared to this.
And it's totally made believe in your head. You just invented this entire town,
Yeah.
which is very cool.
Yeah. Although, I keep having to go back to the other earlier books and think, what was the name of that diner? And I sort of, oh yes, because I could try to keep it consistent.
Now, when you're out on book tour now, when you're in a hotel or a coffee shop or whatever, do you look at people and think, wow, I wonder what those secrets are? Because I could sure put them in my next book.
No, I really don't. I'm more like thinking, when's the limo coming? When's he coming? Where are we going next? I cannot remember where we're going next.
Because you probably don't remember what town you're in at the
Every
moment.
once in a while, particularly if I'm with my wife Neetha, sometimes what is fun is to listen to other conversations. So maybe not watch people, but every once in a while you'll be in a restaurant, and often it's my wife who catches it first, and she'll say, and I think she hears better than I do, and she'll say, oh, they're talking about such and such, and it's like we'll go really quiet, and we were in New York in May, and we were in this coffee shop thing, and 2 tables over was a couple in a huge fight, and we just pretended to read the newspaper, and just listened to all of it.
It's just too good.
It was better than cable.
I have to give a warning to your readers. As soon as you finish the last page, you're going to want to know more about David Harwood, more about Promise Falls, and I know there are more books coming. I think that the talented book reviewer Eileen Cogdill said it best, and she gave you a great review.
She's wonderful, yeah.
She said that Promise Falls isn't the town most of us would want to live in, but we cannot wait to revisit. I want to thank you so much for being here. Linwood Barclay's latest book is Broken Promise. I'm Ann Bocock. For more stories, tune in to the next Between the Covers.
That was great. Thank you.
That was a lot of fun.